So in the last lecture, we saw how to use two different methods, query selector and query selector all, both on the document object to query the DOM and grab elements from it. Now the query selector, that grabbed a single element, but the query selector all, it grabbed multiple elements based on CSS selectors. Now in this video, I'm going to show you some alternative ways to query the DOM to grab elements, and I'm going to show you three in total. The first way I'm going to show you is to grab an element by its ID. So the way we do that is by first of all creating some kind of variable. I'm going to call it title and set it equal to document, and the method we're going to use is called getElementById. Now if we look inside our index page, we can see we have this h1 right here. I've given it an ID of page-title. Now in an HTML page you shouldn't have more than one ID of the same name, so there shouldn't be another ID down here with page title. There should only be one ID of that name on the page. So inside here all we need to do is place in a string the ID. Now we don't need the hash symbol, which we would do if we were using query selector to select an ID. That's already implied in the name. We're already selecting an ID. We just need to specify the name of the ID, and that is page title. So this goes out and it gets a reference to this page title ID element, which is the h1. So now if I say console.log and the title, we should see that in the console. Save it and check this out, and voila, we get it right there. Cool. So the next one I want to show you is how to get elements based on their class name. So let's come down here. I'm going to say const errors because we're going to go out and grab the errors, and that's going to be equal to documents.getElementsByClassName. And notice the difference here. Elements is singular, so this only ever grabs a single element. This here is plural, so it will grab multiple elements if there are multiple elements of that class. So inside index we can see this has a class of error and this has a class of error. I want to grab both of those so I can enter the class name in here. Again, we don't need the dot as we would do in a CSS selector using query selector. It's already implied that we're getting a class in the method name. So we just pass in the class name without the dot right there. Now, if we log this to the console, errors, oops, we need to do this correctly, errors, and save this. Let's have a look what happens. Okay, so we get this thing right here. Now this is an HTML collection. In the last video when we used query selector all, we saw that we got a node list. Now these two things are similar but not identical. Like a node list, we can still use square bracket notation to get a single element from that list or that collection. We can say console.log and then errors, and we'll say 0 to get the first element, for example, and it's still going to give us that back. But we cannot use the for each method on the HTML collection. If I try to do this, let me come down here and say errors.forEach, and then inside we'll do a callback function with an error parameter. This is each individual error. This is not going to work. Console.log error, and save this. We can see we get an error. We can see errors.forEach is not a function. So we can't use for each on an HTML collection. Okay? So what I'm going to do is leave a little document attached to this lecture just showing the different things we can do with a node list and an HTML collection, so you have those clear in your mind. But anyway, this is a way to grab elements based on their class name. So let me just delete that, and I'm going to comment all of this stuff out for now, and this stuff up here, so it's not putting us off in the console. And finally, I want to show you how to get elements based on their tag name. So I'm going to try and grab a reference to all the p tags in the document. So I'm going to be looking for the tag name p. So the way we do this is again by storing it in some kind of variable and setting it equal to documents.getElementsByTagName. So they're all self-explanatory, they're quite easy to remember. And we just pass in the tag name as a string right here. So this goes out and it grabs all of the p tags on the page, and it's going to store them again in an HTML collection inside this paras constant. So if I say console.log and we're going to log out paras, we should see those over here. Again, HTML collection. And if I want to grab a single one of those, I can use square bracket notation. So console.log paras, and we'll just say we want the index 1 from there. Save, and we can see that p tag right here. So All of these different methods give us different ways to query the DOM. It doesn't much matter which methods you choose, but anything you can select with these methods, you can also select with the query selector methods I showed you in the last video. So I tend to stick with using the query selector or query selector all because it's simple and very flexible, and you can query any element you need using them. Also, it's useful to be able to use for each directly on a node list, which is returned by the query selector methods. Tag name and class list both return HTML collections, which we can't directly use for each on. We'd have to convert these into arrays first of all, which is just one extra step we can do without. But again, you can still use these methods, and they're nice to know. You can use whichever one you're most comfortable with.